Swimming in Irish whiskey, telling tall tales of Roman history, pissing off illiterates, and smoking cigarettes. Rants about religion and stories of Japan. He's Cato Kiss the Damned.
I don't know where the lid went though, dude.
Oh, I've got another bottle of Bushmills. Do you want to drink some tonight? Anyways,
Jeez,
the reason
I wouldn't
why
mind tasting some, but I don't want to drink mine.
Okay, the reason why I turned on the video camera at all was because I wanted to bounce this idea off.
Is it still going?
Okay, Darwin. Yeah, it'll go on for a while. I've got plenty of video space. Anyways, Darwin came up with the basic theory of evolution.
Yes.
Correct?
No.
Well, over the years, hasn't it been
Concurrently
kind of
with Wallace.
refined? Hasn't it been kind of refined and developed a little more? Or has it just stayed static? Did he come up with the perfect theory and nobody's had to modify it or amend it or
Well,
fuck with it a
depends
little
on
bit?
it depends on how you define it, because I mean, there's research going on today about how things work, how sexual selection works. Now, the fundamentals of sexual selection are unchanged, meaning there's such a thing as intra and intersexual selection. Those things are unchanged, but how those things apply to certain ecological conditions, certain biological organisms, these things are things that are always under scrutiny. They're always studied, and we're constantly learning. I mean, when my undergrad, in my undergrad, that's what I studied. I studied sexual selection in tree frogs. In particular, in Missouri, we have Hyla chrysosceles and Hyla versicolor. Hyla chrysosceles arose from Hyla versicolor via autopolyploidy, which basically means that, like, when they were tadpoles, like with the eggs, something happened, and anyway, they ended up having 4 sets of chromosomes. With frogs, that works just fine, but that alters how they do things.
What, they had more chromosomes?
They had 4 sets versus 2 sets.
Okay. So there was an example of extra chromosomes. Speciation.
Yeah.
So it's a definite, solid example of speciation.
Well, yeah, but there were other examples of speciation. I mean,
Really? So it's not that uncommon?
the European house sparrow was documented as being brought over from Europe. Imagine that. And it was introduced on the East Coast. I don't remember how many years ago, but now you can find the descendants of that species on the West Coast, but they don't interbreed. They can't. There's a lot of isolation. There's a lot of genetic drift, but also there's behavioral isolation. So if you were to put a West Coast and an East Coast version of this bird in the same cage, they probably wouldn't mate. So there's huge debate in biology about genetically they could.
Genetically, they're compatible.
But they
like
wouldn't.
dogs and wolves.
And so, yeah, but what happens? I mean, if you're behaviorally isolated from, sexually reproducing with another species, what happens? With time, you continue to diverge.
Yeah. Kind of like apes and chimpanzees.
But there's, there are ring species of salamanders that are basically one species that's expanded to a lot of different environments, and then from these different environments, they're behaviorally isolated or physically isolated or whatever, and they're all basically what one would consider separate species. You see a lot of that in Australia. A lot of speciation things happen in Australia.
With the African, have you heard about the African toads down there, that their legs have
Cane toads.
increased like 25%, hasn't it?
Well, cane toads are
They've
highly...
just been there a couple of years. And
They're
all of a
highly
sudden their legs have
toxic.
been loaded.
Anyway, they have issues with cane toads in Australia that are highly toxic, and they just like poison the water that they're in and kill everything.
That's not.
But that's an introduced species, which is interesting.
There you go, Tom.
But speciation is not that uncommon. It's a little bit difficult to observe on our time frame. because, how long do I live? I may live 70 years, but how many generations is that?